Hello and welcome to the podcast series CAREWELL Conversations, raising awareness about the issues and challenges facing family carers who combine work and care. By engaging with employers, HR professionals, employee representative organisations, family carers and the research community. My name is Brian Doyle. I'm the podcast series producer and a researcher with the CAREWELL Project, a collaboration between University College Dublin and Family Carers Ireland, funded by the Health Research Board. The overall aim of the CAREWELL Research Project is to promote health and self-care among working family carers. And over the course of this podcast series, we will have conversations with those who have a role to play in supporting working family carers and begin to tease out the challenges and issues facing them and their employers. Welcome to CAREWELL Conversations. This episode, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Professor Alison Williams, who's joining us from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. So Alison is a social and health geographer with research interests in carer employees, quality of life, critical policy program evaluation, and therapeutic landscapes. So her research focuses on improving workplace practices for supporting employees with adult care responsibilities. So Alison, thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
So maybe we could just start. I know you're here to talk about a few specific things, but just maybe you might just give us a little bit on your background and how you arrived at your research interests that you're working on currently.
Certainly. Well, as a health geographer, I'm really interested in place and space. And one of the issues that we study in health geography is the tensions between both time and space as they relate to people's day-to-day lives. And certainly for individuals who are not only employed but are also simultaneously providing unpaid care, they are really navigating a range of different space-time tensions, particularly when their work environment is different from their home environment, which may be different from the location where their care recipient is, whether that be long-term care or living independently in the community. So as a consequence, the daily geographies of care workers or care employees, as they're sometimes called, are often extremely complex. And these are even more complex in the cases of individuals who are also caring for young dependents, and we call these folks sandwich carers. Similarly, these time-space tensions are much more complicated for those who are called double duty carers, which are individuals who are not only working in the paid labor force as carers in the healthcare system formally, but also simultaneously providing unpaid care work. So again, each individual daily geography is obviously quite unique to the care employee of concern. But at the same time, we recognize that there are increased complexities for those who have additional roles, whether they be in paid care work or whether they be caring for young dependents, for example.
Thank you for that, Alison. Yeah, I think that's something that I've certainly come across on the podcast that we've recorded to date is the diverse needs of the family carers and the diverse employment that they're in as well, and the as you say the tensions and time tensions that places on them. So, what has inspired you to carry out research on and advocate for family carers who are in paid employment or carer workers, as you call them?
This work really evolved from my doctoral dissertation where I did applied research specifically in community home care. And my first academic job provided an opportunity to do some applied research on palliative home care. And what was recognized in both those experiences was that carers, and these were predominantly women, had to leave their employment or their paid work in order to provide the often increasing hours and intensity of care tasks required, particularly in palliative cases. So, clearly there was this trend, this pattern that was evident. And so not long after, Canada unveiled its compassionate care benefit, which is basically a 28-week leave, which provides protection for jobs, as well as a stipend similar to our unemployment insurance. And I spent about 10 years evaluating that particular benefit from a range of different perspectives. But again, learned that the employer has a very clear role to play in supporting unpaid carers, and there's an ethical imperative for employers to do so. And this then moved into the standard work, which you referred to earlier. And the standard work was really an opportunity to determine workplace guidelines to better support and accommodate carers in the workplace. And rather than just a set of guidelines, because there's lots of guidelines out there, strategies to, for example, support carers at work, I wanted to find a way that we could formalize it via a standard, which could then move from being a voluntary standard to potentially a compulsory standard where it was regulated within a particular country context or a provincial context, for example, in the case of Canada. And so the aspiration is that these standards, both the Canadian and the international standard, become regulated as required by workplaces in the years forthcoming, whether it be a decade or more. And of course, the underlying motivation for all of this work has been gender equality. As you know, and as many of your former podcast guests have mentioned, the bulk of care provision in the world, across the world, both in the global south and the global north, is provided by women. And so gender equality is a critical piece of the puzzle here if we are going to share the care work as well as share the domestic labor. And I speak to the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, specifically goal number 5, which specifies the importance of gender inequality and the importance of standards to empower all women and girls, which is argued as being central to the achievement of all other goals. And specifically, Goal 5 includes a target, 5.4, which reads, value unpaid care and promote shared domestic responsibilities. So this work as a whole is really focusing on gender equality and specifically reducing these inequalities across both sex and gender. And I've just listed 4 other sustainability development goals, which refer specifically to our standards work. One being goal number 8, decent work and economic growth. As we know, care-friendly workplace accommodations are central to decent work, and having women in the workforce, and women globally represent approximately 40% of the workforce, improves economic growth. When we talk about sustainability development goal number 3, good health and well-being, we know that employment not only provides income, but also supports the family. So good health and well-being, not only for care workers, but also for their families. Again, recognizing that between 57 and 81% of all unpaid carers are female, again, across the world, depending upon country context. And then very much related to goal number 3 is SDG number 1, no poverty. Given that the majority of unpaid carers are female, we recognize that they have a central role in ensuring that the household lives above the poverty line. And employment is the primary way out of poverty, as well as the primary way to prevent poverty. And then finally, as a geographer, obviously, I'm interested in the larger place context with respect to sustainability. And we know that goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities, recognize that care workers who are juggling both employment and unpaid care work are more successful in doing so when they're supported in resilient, inclusive, supportive, sustainable cities and communities. So this really speaks to, for example, the nonprofit sector, as well as the public sector, in addition to, obviously, the employer and the healthcare system in supporting these care workers to sustain their role. In Canada, we have 8.1 million caregivers, and we're a country of about 40 million. And of these 8.1 million, 75% are also simultaneously in the labor market, so are working in the labor market, whereas 25% are just doing their caregiving work full time. So again, it's a significant number of Canadians. It's 1 in 4 Canadians. And again, it represents close to 1/3 of our labor market. And as you folks know at CareWell, and as we know internationally, care workers experience a wide range of negative impacts from, again, both physical and emotional health challenges, as well as the need to take a leave of absence, take time off or leave early from work, reducing their work hours, turning down job opportunities and promotions. And then last but not least, what we don't want to see is them leaving the workforce, because once they leave the workforce, they lose their income. They often lose their pension. They often lose their sense of belonging and their sense of identity. They often lose their social network and consequently move into often experiences characterized as isolated.
It's a lot of information there. Maybe I'll go back to the inspiration or the motivation piece that you did, and it probably strikes a little bit of a chord with Family Carers Ireland here, who were involved in the CAREWELL project or collaborator in the CAREWELL project, have recently published their State of Caring report for the survey they did earlier this year. And gender is one of the sub-reports that has come out of that, and the impact of gender and the gender equality that you spoke to there. And I suppose in comparison to looking at Canada and Ireland, I think we've about 500,000 people who identify as a family carer within Ireland. So it's within the workforce, it's about 1 in 9. But that number is obviously growing as the population ages as well, that you're bringing a lot more people into that caring. You have developed a carer-friendly workplace standard in Canada, which outlines 3 steps of success. So I wonder, could you tell us a bit about that standard and maybe go through the 3 steps for us?
So our Canadian standard looks like this. The illustration on the left is the actual standard itself, the B-701-17. It's called the Care Inclusive and Accommodating Organization Standard. And the illustration on the right is our implementation guide, or our handbook, entitled Helping Worker Carers in Your Organization. And the implementation guide or handbook on the right, funny enough, has a greater number of downloads than the standard itself. And we really understand that to be due to the fact that it's much more user-friendly and it's much more applicable with respect to the actual uptake of the guidelines themselves. There are a number of different case studies and real-world examples provided in the handbook. Both of these documents are currently available in both English and French, and they are complimentary downloads for the future, specifically the next 3 years. So again, complimentary downloads are available on the Canadian Standards website at the 2 links provided at the bottom of this slide. So the question was specifically the 3 specific steps that are suggested in the Canadian standard. And the first one, as noted on the right here, is to build the foundation. So if a workplace is interested in basically creating a care-friendly policy or a care-friendly program, the first step is to build the foundation. And that means committing leaders and resources, engaging workers from the bottom up, through the creation of a committee, and then doing an environmental scan to determine what's currently available, and in so doing, determining the gaps in that particular scan, to develop care-friendly policies, being sure to review human rights requirements and commit to necessary accommodations. And then the fourth sub-step is to review current legal requirements, such as the compassionate care benefit, and then again, compliance with requirements within the Human Rights Act. And then finally, meet social and ethical responsibilities specific to your organization's responsibility for care workers and all employees more broadly. The second primary step is to put the standard into practice, and this is made up of 9 specific sub-steps, including examining policies and programs, identifying opportunities, defining organizational goals, maintaining confidentiality, building awareness, promoting services, cultivating a care-inclusive culture, actively supporting care employees, and finally, planning for the unexpected, such as, for example, COVID. So an emergency response plan, which allocates resources to, again, the unexpected incidents and critical events that come our way. So obviously, each of these need to be done in order. And the two which we've recognized in our own work to being central to success is number 5, building awareness. And this is really awareness not only for care workers specifically, but their supervisors, their managers, and the executive team, all of whom often need to receive specialized training and consequently are more aware and responsive to care workers. And then number 7 is, again, a critically important one, cultivating a care-inclusive culture. And this really means fostering a care-friendly environment where care workers feel part of, feel comfortable identifying as care workers, and feel comfortable coming forward with their needs and their requirements in order to, again, maintain employment and sustain their multiple roles. So again, these are done consecutively in moving through these 9 steps. Putting the standard into practice is often the most time-intensive of the 3 steps. And at the bottom left, you can see a number of different resources for working carers, a wide range of different potential interventions which could make up a program or policy in any particular workplace. The beauty of the standard is that it can apply to any sector, from manufacturing through to service sectors, for example, as well as encompasses different sizes of workplaces, from small mom and pop shops through to multinational corporations. The third step is to monitor progress and impact. And of course, this is essential in order to conduct ongoing improvement and continual refinement of the policy and the program. And this includes measuring ongoing effectiveness, conducting regular internal assessments, and completing management reviews in order to plan for continuous improvement. And this really speaks to recognizing what's working well and what needs to be changed or improved, as well as being cognizant of the fact that the profile of your care workers may change over time. So the number and the type of care workers in one particular year may be different 5 years from then or 10 years from then. So being cognizant again of what that care worker profile looks like and consequently what needs are required by that particular group.
Thank you for the overview of the 3 steps. A lot of information there, and I can see why the PowerPoints are important as well. So we will certainly have the links for that in our podcast and have the visuals there for people to see, and links to the website and things. So just a couple of points that I might ask to kind of clarify a bit. As you're probably aware, with the CAREWELL project, we're looking at building our own intervention and looking after the health and well-being of family carers in the workplace. And certainly one of the themes that has come up on the podcast and then some of our focus groups, and that is this building awareness and the building awareness. I think you said it was specialized training. A lot of people have said like the building of awareness needs to come from family carers, and it needs to come from people within organizations that have supported family carers. So like at the different levels of the organization. So you mentioned the specialized training. What does that involve, or could you just elaborate a little bit on that for us, maybe?
Yes, of course. What we've done in our research group with respect to building awareness is we've actually targeted managers and supervisors, and we've requested that they come to a 1-hour training session. And the 1-hour training session is basically an opportunity for them to recognize the extent to which care workers exist within the organization. So we start with the sort of the macro national statistics, which I shared with you earlier. And then we hone down to the specific sector of interest. So for example, if it's the educational sector, we hone in on those numbers, and then we hone in further on the specific numbers, if available, in the particular workplace of concern. And then we talk a little bit about the impacts from both a physical and a mental perspective with respect to, again, the negative outcomes that I referred to earlier in the infographic. And then we speak about the human rights issue with respect to in Canada, we clearly have the need to care as a human right, and workplaces are to accommodate carers in order to ensure that they do meet that human right requirement of providing care as needed. So that's discussed and elaborated on, as well as the review of the current EAP, the Employment Assistance Program, if there is one, and or any other supports available at the workplace itself. Because, again, awareness is part of recognizing what's currently in place. And oftentimes we've learned from our research is that care workers often don't know what's currently available for them, either in their EAP or in the workplace more broadly through their benefits, for example. So bringing that awareness forward, particularly for supervisors and managers, is really essential, so they can be discussed and advertised, frankly, marketed to, again, the employees under their responsibility. And then finally, we talk a little bit about burnout, because this is often what we see first and foremost in the workplace, specifically care workers coming forward with issues specific to burnout. So how do we identify burnout? How do we recognize it? And how do we deal with it? And then we also include a number of different conversational prompts that supervisors and managers can use, and HR personnel, in order to better understand the extent to which care workers need the supports that hopefully will be provided by the employer going forward. So we actually do have the management training slides on the website, my partnership grant website, under tools and curriculum. So I could certainly provide the link to those directly, but those slides may be a good first crack at what you're hoping to achieve in your own work with Family Carers Ireland.
Oh, thanks for that, Alison. Yeah, no, and say that probably is the goal of the CAREWELL project as well, is that we would be, bringing that sort of intervention to workplaces and to organizations. And I did find it interesting that when you did the two steps, and in the second step, the two steps that you highlighted, or the two parts of that you highlighted, were the building awareness and the number 7, the cultivate a care inclusive culture, which is definitely something that's coming up within the podcast and our teams, is to cultivate that culture within an organization's the employees are more readily, going to step forward and identify them as carers, and you're not just supporting that section of your not just supporting family carers, you're supporting all employees. So, it creates a good ethos within the organization. So thank you for that, Alison. So that's kind of, you've described the standard there. I just wonder, you've been using this in Canada for a number of years now. Could you speak to any of the kind of the facilitators to the implementation, or challenges or obstacles that you've found, or barriers that you may have found as you've implemented them?
Yeah, certainly. So the Canadian standard was unveiled in 2007, and I apologize for the text-heavy slide here, but what I wanted to do is highlight two case studies where we've done a pre-post design where the intervention itself was the standard. And so in the first case, we looked at a post-secondary educational institution, and there's a wide range of publications that have come out of that, including a research brief, which is a 2-page lay report available at that link. But overall, what we found is that as a result of the intervention, we significantly reduced adverse health outcomes in care workers, including depression, psychosocial health, and self-reported health. We also found a significant reduction in negative work outcomes related to work role function, job security, schedule control, work-family conflict, family-work conflict, supervisor, and coworker support. And we also found the intervention provided solidification of caregiver identity, which, as you mentioned, is a critical piece in the culture change required. There was also solidification of the care worker confidence and awareness, as well as achieving a balance between being a caregiver and an employee, as well as the use of flexible workplace accommodations. And this first case study, was also cost effective, with an estimated positive net benefit of between $48,000 and $676,000 Canadian. Our second case study was more recent. It was one done with a multinational oil and gas engineering contractor, specifically its head office here in Canada. And this particular case study took place during COVID. And although we didn't see any evidence of cost effectiveness, we did see that there were benefits specific to changes to employee morale, increased satisfaction with supervisor, increased job satisfaction, and better work culture. And as I'm sure you folks know, there are a wide range of benefits to incorporating care-friendly workplaces, including increased retention, increased productivity, increased employee morale, as well as increased presence in the workplace. And as a consequence, there's less turnaround, and there's less absenteeism and less presenteeism, and fewer people leaving the workforce. So it truly is a win-win if the workplace is able to recognize and really move forward with respect to the importance of care workers and the benefits that they bring forward to the job market. And you asked specifically about facilitators and barriers. What we have found, and this is, work from the overall research team, there's a group of about 10 co-investigators making up our partnership grant, which is mobilizing the Canadian Care Standard. And we have one particular project targeting barriers and facilitators. And what we've learned overall is that facilitators really, for the most part, require a champion. So someone who's in a decision-making capacity, whether it be the director of human resources or whether it be a top executive, who's really championing the cause with respect to supporting care workers. There also has to be motivation, obviously, by the workplace, whether that be internally motivated through, for example, wanting to improve work-life balance, or externally motivated, such as being on the top 100 companies list in a particular year, for example. So again, there has to be some sort of motivation and interest in work-life balance. There also has to be recognition of the additional time and energy required of the employees who make up the committee in, again, step one. And these need to include care workers, obviously. And this often requires administrative personnel to organize and manage, as well as resources. So the resources, for example, may be providing in kind through paid time at work, or someone to, for example, set up a carers lunch and learn, or individuals who are available to create a online support group with an additional website built into, again, an employee's work portal for care workers specifically. So there does need to be some investment by the employer in both personnel and resources. And then obviously the recognition given, again, step 3 around ongoing monitoring, that this is a persistent effort. It's just not a one-off. You just don't create it and forget about it. You need to create this care-friendly workplace and continuously invest effort, time, and resources in order to see it basically move to a place where it's effectively sustaining the care workers in your organization and maintaining their health, well-being, and quality of life, both at work and outside of work. Some of the barriers that we've recognized is, first and foremost, workplace culture. If the workplace isn't recognizing care workers, if the workplace isn't allowing care workers to feel safe in discussing their needs as care workers, then the culture needs to change. And so this is often recognized in, again, care workers not identifying as care workers, meaning they don't see themselves as carers. And consequently, they don't see the needs and the benefits that a carer-friendly workplace program or policy could provide. Other barriers include lack of personnel and resources, not being committed to the cause, lack of interest, and work-life balance. So again, just the focus on, for example, profit or, numbers or productivity more generally. And then we've also come across issues, particularly in the last 5 years, around the prioritization of mental health, for example. So mental health in Canada has received a whole lot of attention, and there's been a lot of capacity building around mental health. And what we've done in our work is try to sort of fit under the umbrella of mental health, given that we often see negative mental health outcomes as one of the first outcomes that care workers experience when they're burned out. We've also more currently seen equity, diversity, and inclusion issues at the forefront as a priority in workplaces. And of course, our work as care-friendly workplaces can simultaneously be fit under that umbrella as well, as carers do need to be included and do need to be prioritized as a group that is particularly vulnerable. And then obviously, as we all know, COVID-19 presents an emergency response that, basically resulted in a whole lot of upheaval and represented a very real barrier to particularly our intervention.
Thank you for that, Alison. A very detailed answer and a lot to contemplate there. I'm just kind of conscious of some of the other speakers that we've had on the podcast, representing organizations and the HR people and that have kind of identified the benefits of retaining people within the workplace, the family carers, retaining that skill and experience, and that it is worth the investment. And as your case study showed there, the first one, that there is a cost benefit to the organization, and that was measured in that. So as you say in the facilitation there, that it does need a persistent effort and lengthy commitment, that it's not just a once-off, that it has to be, it's a consistent thing that needs to be maintained. And you're saying you need a champion at the management level or fairly high up. I'm just wondering, probably not to generalize, but do you find that the champions at that level are people that have had caring experience, or is that one of the motivating factors, or is it purely that they recognize the benefit to the organization of supporting these workers and all workers, I suppose?
Yeah, no, the former is our experience. If the top executive or the HR director has had experience being a care worker, they're more likely to be the champion. And we found in our work in both Canada and across the English speaking world that these are generally top female executives, although there is also male executives who champion this cause, who have experienced being a care worker as well. So yeah, the experience of having the care worker um, uh, uh, in one's back pocket is certainly a key initiator for the champion to do the job needed to get the work done.
Thanks for that. That's very interesting that the gender comes in there as well, like the gender lens as well is seen in that. So thank you for that. I know for my next question, you have been working with the International Standards Organization to put these carer-friendly workplace standards on a more international footing. So maybe you could discuss what was involved in that process, or what is involved in that process, and where you are now with that project.
Yeah, certainly. So just very quickly, this is the timeline that we followed with respect to the 3-year window it took from the proposal stage to the publication stage. The working group was an essential component of the building of the international standard. And stage 3 was the committee stage, which was the most time intensive, where the working group met generally about every 6 weeks to 2 months to develop the content. And then we also had a public review, which lasted 12 weeks, where the draft was basically sent out for comment, after which it was approved by our technical committee, and then finally published with a very close edit by the International Standards Organization. And I'm happy to say it was published in December of 2021 and is currently available on the International Standards Organization's website, called Aging Societies, General Requirements and Guidelines for Care Inclusive Organizations. And so obviously the Canadian care standard that I referred to earlier was the seed document to this international standard. So there are certainly a few updates and additional resources in the international standard, but on the face of it, it's very much, again, the 3 steps that I outlined within the Canadian standard. And again, as I mentioned, the international standard too is applicable to any organization, regardless of size, sector, or geography. And it's also used in conjunction with an organization's management system, its human resource program, and or equity, diversity, and inclusion program, or it can be used as a standalone program as well. And so what's interesting about both the Canadian and the international standard is that we're really focusing on caregivers who are providing care to adult children, or again, adults with chronic or episodic conditions and older dependents, and or long-term child care recipients who have chronic illness or permanent cognitive, sensory, or physical disability. So again, long-term caregivers. And as I mentioned, it's very much following the Canadian standard, where you're setting the stage, you're developing the program. Setting the stage is, again, step 1. Developing and implementing the program is step 2. Monitoring, measuring, reviewing, and improving is step 3. So very similar methodology with respect to the key elements following the 3 steps in the Canadian standard.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Alison. Yeah, it sounds like a big job of work, and I could hear the satisfaction in your voice when you say you reached the stage last December of getting it out there.
Yeah, for sure.
I know Ireland were involved in the project, so maybe you could talk a bit about what Ireland's involvement in and how that manifested itself.
Yeah, of course. I've, of course, being a geographer, I have to map everything. And so what I did was I mapped our working group members, and everything in blue are the voting members, including Ireland. So Family Carers Ireland was involved as a voting member, together with Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Finland, Norway, Uganda, South Korea, China, Singapore, and Germany. So we did have a few countries from the global south represented, and a few from countries with a different political bent, such as, again, China. We also had observers noted in pink there, and these were individuals who could comment but couldn't vote. And they included France, Japan, and Sweden, and we also received some comments from Thailand. And then our liaisons were the European Trade Union Commission and Eurocarers, and the Secretariat was Canada, although the Technical Committee 314, which is the larger umbrella committee, which is responsible for this and approximately 6 to 7 other standards, had its secretariat in the United Kingdom. But our working group secretariat was Canada, as we initiated the actual international standard for carer inclusive organizations. Sorry, I'm just moving on to I think our second last question.
Yeah, that's no problem. And thanks for that. How Ireland were involved in it. And I know Eurocarers were involved there as well. And we spoke to Stacey Yugomanis from Eurocarers as one of our early podcasts, actually. So as you said, you've moved on to the next slide is, so I think you referenced it earlier in the discussion as well, that COVID has an impact on certain aspects of your research to date. And we would have seen here in Ireland and Europe that the COVID pandemic had a significant impact on all sections of society, but especially the family carers. So just wondering, could you maybe talk a bit about how COVID impacted on working family carers in Canada?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for that question. We've been very fortunate to receive data from Embracing Carers, who did a large survey during COVID on the impact of COVID-19 on care workers specifically. It was a very large survey of carers more broadly, 9,000, and 70% of those were care workers. So we got a nice sample, but it was only aggregated at the country level. So we weren't able to look in any great detail on the actual sociodemographic characteristics of these care workers. But what we found across the 12 countries was that obviously the vast majority experienced an increase in the mean hours spent caring per week over the course of COVID. And for most countries, as you can see on the right, they haven't returned to before COVID hours. So the last data point was the fall of 2020, and you can see at that point that the number of hours spent caring per week were still quite high, again, as compared to the time before COVID-19. And Canada is right at the bottom there. Where again, we moved from about 17 mean hours spent caring per week to approximately 19 and a half, and we've stayed there through to fall 2020. Another interesting piece that we were able to garner from the data was the types of support before and during COVID in the G7 countries as well as Australia. And what we see on the left is the federal government supports, and Canada is the blue with the 2 diamonds on the end of the line. And you can see that before COVID, we were receiving about 14% of federal government support. During COVID, we were up to about 26.5%. Local state government, again, we saw an increase from about 16 to about 24%. And then employers, we saw a smaller increase from about 12 to approximately 23%. So what's interesting here is that our federal government support compared relatively well. We were about the middle with respect to local and state government support, but we were the lowest during COVID-19 with respect to employers providing any kind of support for care workers, which is quite problematic and very telling with respect to how employers responded during COVID-19 in Canada. You can see there were some really nice spikes in certain countries such as Australia and in Germany, as well as the United Kingdom and Italy, with respect to employers stepping up to the plate and doing what was needed for care workers. But unfortunately, we didn't see that in Canada. And then finally, we looked at deteriorating emotional and mental health, which I said earlier is usually one of the first signs of burnout in care workers. And we experienced in Canada a greater number of care employees or care workers with deteriorating emotional and mental health, specifically when compared to less support from employers during COVID-19. So you can see the trend here. The higher deteriorating mental health is associated with very poor support from employers, whereas comparatively better mental health is associated, as you would expect, with higher support from employers. And unfortunately, Canada was not in that positive end. It was unfortunately experiencing quite negative mental health outcomes as a result of the poor employer support received. So again, this paper is currently in press. It will be coming out in a special issue of Wellbeing, Space and Society, published by Elsevier, and is available for free download. I expect it should be out before Christmas, so certainly can share that once it's out.
That'd be great, Alison. Yeah, I look forward to looking at that. I know, again, I referenced the State of Caring report earlier on, and that was looking at all family carers, wasn't just family carers that were in paid employment. But definitely we noticed that we asked questions about pre-COVID and during COVID, and there was definitely a decline in, as you say, mental health and that, and it was an increase in feelings of loneliness and financial difficulty as well. So it's kind of would mirror some of the findings there. As I say, it's not relevant to, in paid employment, but it was just relative to family carers themselves and what they experienced during COVID, which I suppose kind of resources and kind of respites were all closed down, and people found themselves at home all the time with the people that were caring and that. So very interesting. So thank you. I think we're getting towards the end of our discussion. So just the last question is just what does the future hold for your research and yourself? What's in store for working family carers in Canada and beyond?
Certainly. Yeah, and I hope, these next steps resonate with you folks at CAREWELL as well, because we're certainly open to, collaborating internationally in the work that we do, and such as yourselves, and advocating for care workers within the workplace. Certainly, I think from a research perspective, we need to continue building the business case for care-friendly workplaces. We also need to provide more evidence around case files, specifically highlighting caring as a human right. And I think there's an opportunity to also track the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, as I've outlined earlier, in order to see if care-friendly workplaces are making any difference with respect to moving the needle towards improved gender equality. From a practice perspective, I think there's an opportunity, and certainly we've tried to jump on the bandwagon with respect to mental health capacity building initiatives, as well as equity, diversity, and inclusion capacity initiatives, and building a care-friendly workplace culture. And then again, the ongoing education piece for the people that matter in supporting care workers, whether they be human resource personnel, managers, supervisors, or top executives. And then finally, being sure that we're empowering care workers to not only ask for what they need, but to advocate for what they need in order to move the needle forward in, again, having employers support care workers, not only in the 21st century, but moving forward. As I think the employer is one of the last bastions, if you will, of opportunities to support care workers. When we look at the larger structure of society, we're seeing that families are not only becoming smaller, but are becoming increasingly mobile. So family supports are increasingly tentative and often not necessarily as available as they were generations ago. We also find that the state support is also flailing due to, again, our demography with our aging population. Certainly in Canada, we're finding our healthcare system is particularly strained at this time. And so our state supports are quite limited. And as a consequence, it's really the employer who needs to step up to the plate and play a role, and has, frankly, an ethical imperative to do so, given the labor that is invested by care workers to, again, that employer's success. So finally, I just wanted to recognize our funders, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada and the Canadian Institutes for Health Research via a Healthy and Productive Work Partnership grant focused on mobilizing the CARE standard. And I'd also like to invite all of you to come visit us at our website, which is ghw.mcmaster.ca. And you're also more than welcome to reach out to me. I'd be happy to direct you to the resources and needs that you may have. And as I mentioned earlier, more than interested in collaborating. My email is awill@mcmaster.ca. And then finally, I just wanted to share a few of the free downloads that are available on our tools and curriculum site. We have a range of different posters and occupational health and safety documents for workplaces to begin the process of creating care inclusive and accommodating organizations. And the manager's PowerPoint that I referred to earlier is also there, as you can see in the title, Fostering a Care-Friendly Workplace. So I encourage you to take a look at those resources. And as I said, always happy to entertain any emails or points of interest regarding this work. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Alison. That was very interesting, and a lot of what you discussed there, or the series of questions that I asked you, certainly resonate well with the CAREWELL project, both what we're finding in our work so far, and speaks to lots of the goals of what we'd like to achieve. And thank you very much for your generous offer of collaboration and support and the resources that you shared there. I have nothing further to ask, Alison. Just want to thank you very much for coming to speak to us today, and give you the opportunity if there's anything else you want to add there. I don't you feel you haven't discussed.
No, I think I've covered all the bases, but I wanted to thank you very much for extending the invitation to participate in your podcast, and congratulations on the great knowledge mobilization work you're doing.
Thank you very much, Alison. We've reached the end of our CAREWELL conversation for this episode. I'd like to thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear more from us, please subscribe to CAREWELL Conversations on your podcast platform of choice, or alternatively, you will find us at carewellproject.com or across our various social media channels, which are linked in our podcast feed. We'd also like to hear from you, our listeners. Please feel free to leave any comments, feedback or suggestions you may have on any of our social media feeds, or you can contact us directly at carewell@ucd.ie. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to you joining us on future CAREWELL Conversations.